Artists are not solving the value of their music problem. They're not solving their data problem. Unless they're actually able to reach people. And people are kind of like, we don't want to be here. You have to listen to that. You have to listen to it and you have to respect it. If I tell you I don't fucking like soda, stop trying to give me soda. Like, stop trying to feed me something I'm telling you I don't want. And I think that maybe that's like the arrogance of all fucking tech companies, is like, oh, the average person is dumb. They don't know what they want.
All the signs were going.
Episode 42 of Invest in Music with VÉRITÉ. Today we're here to talk about her journey as an independent artist and as someone who's been very early to using the Web3 space. We talk about a lot of the issues surrounding connecting with real fans and how she's been able to navigate that using platforms like IYK to help her on her journey. As a reminder, you can collect this episode on investinmusic.xyz. It's the best way to support our guests. So without further ado, let's get into it. Episode 42 with VÉRITÉ. We are back. We got VÉRITÉ in the building. Kelsey, how are we doing tonight?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. It's been a very interesting week. There's been a lot of whirlwinds that I'm excited to talk about. We got quite a lot to unpack with relation to some of the stuff you've been posting this week and just kind of the wider conversation happening on Twitter. But before we do that, why don't you give us a quick background on yourself before we dive into all the good stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am VÉRITÉ. I am an independent artist, have been for the entirety of my career, which is wild that this year will be 10 years as a full-time independent artist, which is wild to think about because when I started this project, my goal was to have a 10-year long career. And it looks nothing like I thought it would, but the core of it, I've accomplished everything that I set out to do and more. Which makes me really excited for what the next 10 years looks like. And that's kind of what brought me into this wild world of Web3, was recognizing that like the systems and structures that I built my career on, the innovations, streaming, the shifts in how people listen to and consume music, the landscape has shifted, the ground has shifted, and it piqued my curiosity of how can we maybe revalue music, build new structures in order to allow artists to create and build sustainable careers that can also last 10, 20 years, that are these really solid foundations and not based off virality, not based off a trend, a hype, etc. And so that's what kind of brought me into this world late 2020. And I've kind of been here ever since. And I just released my third record, I guess maybe a year ago, Jesus, not just, and have kind of been taking that on the road, building experiences for my fans. And I'm excited to, well, I guess I can't say what I'm about to say. So I won't say it yet because it hasn't been announced and I don't know when this is coming out.
A little teaser there. One thing that I've always found very special about you is you've been so connected with your fan base and what they're looking for. And then specifically with you playing around with emerging technology, I feel like you found a way to do it in a really authentic manner. You know, and something that really stood out to me from some of our early conversations was you were around when Spotify first got started, you know, and you were kind of in that early camp of artists that was able to leverage Spotify to build a career for yourself as an independent artist. I'd love to kind of just take us back there to start this conversation. Talk to me about early days of Spotify as an independent artist and what that kind of felt like.
It was a wild juxtaposition having those really early conversations back in when I was releasing music. It was going to number one on Hype Machine, which was kind of the last days of Hype Machine, kind of pre-pivoting to Spotify. I was working a day job, so I was 40 to 80 hours a week at like Applebee's in Times Square, funding the project, and then going, taking dinners with major labels, and then pivoting and going to meetings with Spotify to talk about how my song was going to be number one on New Music Friday. It was very segmented, the existence I was living back then, but it was really exciting. And Spotify was a door. Right. And if we look at where prior to streaming and the organization of digital music, which I consider Spotify to be the organization of digital music, everything was a free for all. The power was really in the hands of major labels, major systems, in order to even have the ability to have distribution for your music. And with the introduction of MP3s and piracy, it became a bit of a free for all, and Spotify was kind of the knife in the back of those existing power structures. And it opened a door for people like me who had no money, who had no connections to the music industry, who weren't. Back then, I was on the trajectory to sign a major label deal that I didn't wind up signing. Um, that became a door, like a Trojan horse a bit,
Mm.
where I could get the same looks and the same attention and the same eyes as some of these major artists, being like number one on New Music Friday above Kendrick Lamar, which is fucking preposterous,
Mm.
because they were championing independent artists early. And that was a great thing. And I think there are parallels that we can get into, of the parallels of Trojan horsing, going around the power structures that exist and then watching the power reconsolidate. Now we
Mm.
see that major labels basically own the playlisting and have major stakes in these streaming companies. And it's no longer a really viable option unless you're integrated within those systems again. And
Yeah.
yes, there are ways around it. There's TikTok, there are all of these things, but even that is reconsolidating, getting more difficult. All of these companies are gaming the algorithms. And so it was a really beautiful and chaotic and exciting time of disruption. And I found a way to embrace it in a means that allowed me to really develop a loyal and sustainable fan base.
Right. And I feel like it's such a powerful case study because you've used that as the foundation for everything else that you've built. You know, sort of this independent artist narrative has been such a strong place for you to operate from. And I feel like in a lot of ways, when I think about your fan base and the way that you release your music and the way that you think about bringing your projects to the world, it feels heavily rooted in that sense of independence and autonomy. And I feel like it's a very powerful place to operate from this conversation because we're going to talk about all the new things that are happening out there. And I feel like you've always had so much flexibility to be early to things like Spotify or like Web3 because you've had this sense of independence and autonomy that grounds really everything that you do within your music career.
Yeah, for sure. And we can get into how that's been a help and a hindrance, right?
Yeah.
The grass is always greener. There are brilliant aspects about independence, about crafting the narrative that I have, about having taken the journey that I have. And then there are things that are fucking hard. There are walls that creates around you. But overall, when I really distill what my goals are as an artist and as a person, it's to have the freedom to create what I want, the freedom to share what I create with people how I want, and the ability to always have the autonomy to move forward. So it's
Mm.
the ability to make mistakes. It's the ability to pivot early and
Mm-hmm.
fast, and that has provided me with the flexibility to bounce back really quick in the face of all of the roadblocks that like inevitably I face, and any artist, regardless of taking a traditional path, a purely alternative path, will face.
100%. And I feel like it's a good segue into the meat of this conversation, which is to start out, you've been doing music NFTs just as long, if not longer, than literally any artist on the planet. I think that you probably minted that first song on Zora in what, like 2020 at this point, huh?
I think it was like the very, very beginning of 2021. And I just said, fuck it. I remember getting on the phone with Vanessa, my manager, and saying, hey, I think I should do this. And I don't know what's going to happen. And she was like, sure. And I threw it up, and it was kind of, and then people bid on it. And I was very confused, to be
Mm.
honest.
I mean, I think it was such a beautiful time because everyone was still figuring out what even is all this in the first place. You know, like, can you really just upload an MP3 to this new platform and then have someone buy it? And I feel like that was kind of the kindling for what ended up becoming the big NFT bull market, you know, every artist in the world trying to figure out how to do a drop, et cetera, et cetera. But the way you approached it was very different. You know, I feel like in that time and place, a lot of artists were coming to a curated platform, maybe not having like a knowledge of what they were doing, but going out and raising hundreds of thousands of dollars and really just kind of throwing their fans in the deep end. And I think that's a lot of what's going to set the tone for this conversation. But I feel like you always approached it with a very authentic point of view of saying like, hey, I don't really know what I'm doing here, but I'm not going to go out and try and make $1 million and like gouge my fans here. You just kind of put it in the ocean of people that were already open to the technology being able to receiving it. And I think that was a very big difference from a way that a lot of other artists came into it, which is what ended up creating this friction that we're going to talk about in this conversation.
Yeah, I really value my fans. Again, I have a 10-year long independent career. There are very few people who can actually say that,
Hmm.
even. Um, and it is because of the people who have been with me, some for the whole duration of time, some for even part, who have consistently shown up and supported me. And my goal isn't extracting as much capital from them as possible. And like, even in all of the hype cycle and the bull cycle, man, I could have made so much more money than I
Hmm.
did.
Hmm.
I could have capitalized, I could have sold. I could have played into narratives that I saw were playing, and I really strategically and intentionally didn't, because I wanted to be sure that every step of the way that what I was doing was in service of the foundation that I had already built. And anything that had the potential to undermine the relationship with the fans, anything that had the potential to undermine the years of work that I had put in prior to even stepping foot into Web3, I didn't see as worth the risk. And so
Yeah.
I really was so intentional every time that I did something where I was in the back channel on Discord with the super fans, like my most engaged fans, explaining it to them, telling them I did not expect them to participate. I don't want you to participate. This
Hmm.
almost like this isn't for you right now, unless you already have a fuck ton of ETH and you want to play.
Yep.
Which there were a few of my fans who were that, who were tech nerds who are already in the ecosystems. Um, but I think I was really intentional to address any friction as it came up directly and head on and one on one, and really just do it in a way that felt correct, authentic, and sustainable.
Right. And talk to me about how that manifested because, you were active on platforms like Catalog where you had records minted there. You did a drop with Royal where you're very active when they first launched. You've been active on Sound where you've had songs on there. So you've played around and you've touched all these different music platforms. I mean, in a bit, we'll talk about your relationship with IYK. You've been around all the right places that you need to be, but you've managed to do it in a way that didn't alienate yourself from your fans. And I feel like you found the right way to speak to them in a very authentic way. How do you just think about, approaching this world and what you do and do not decide to do in the space?
Well, I want to take it back really quick to like why the catalyst for me minting that first NFT were conversations that I had with Blau and RAC, who I
Mm-hmm.
had on my podcast in 2020. And the conversation with RAC was one of the most profound conversations that I had had in a long time about the business of music. Because as an independent artist, I haven't really shied away from that subject. And we talked about how music was set into like a fixed value, and that perhaps blockchain and NFTs could allow for additional tiers of value to exist above the baseline, which is free.
Hmm.
And that really excited me. And so when I sold my first NFT, which you bought, which is wild, um, it was it piqued my curiosity. And then when I sold the second NFT, which was for the launch of Catalog, it sold for 5 ETH. And the patron who purchased that NFT wrote me this note about how they hoped that just the currency they were giving me, how DeFi in general could provide me as an independent artist with the financial freedom that it had given them, and then told me the story of how it had given them financial freedom within their particular circumstance. Right. So that's genuine patronage. And
Yeah.
then you take it a step further to like what was the third NFT that I sold, which was the master percentage of buy now, which was recognizing that my fans aren't going to be interested in this. These things are selling for thousands and thousands of dollars. I'm not even talking to them, marketing to them, right? We're talking about how can I create the maximum possible value to treat music like fine art, create digital scarcity through the blockchain, right? It was a very distinct value proposition that I was trying to suss out and prove out.
Yeah.
And that was setting by now at $1 million valuation, which wound up selling for, the equivalent of 11 ETH. I think it was $21,000. 2.1% of the master went to a fan
Mm-hmm.
who is already in crypto, who is a developer. And that fan shows up to every show I play in their city in their Buy Now shirt, beyond stoked.
Mm.
And so I was trying to play out a very distinct value proposition. And then what we did was see the market start to get saturated. And
Mm-hmm.
I think where we're at now, and what we're probably going to wind up diving into, is the same problems that the ideals of Spotify set out to do crumbled under market oversaturation. And we've just seen that market oversaturation hit Web3 way quicker because the consumer base is much less.
Yeah. And I mean, I want to go into, kind of the bulk of this conversation, which is Optimism launched this We Heart the Art on-chain art competition. You had an incredible entry, which is what sparked me to reach out and sort of prompted this podcast. Would you like to talk a little bit more about sort of what your submission for this contest was? And we can use that as a footing into kind of the wider conversation.
Yeah, I took a risk. We'll see. We'll see how it plays. But I definitely took a risk where, in lieu of minting a song, which I could have minted many,
Mm-hmm.
I took to my Discord to get my fans' opinions on NFTs. And I want to give a disclaimer about the subset of fans that responded. My Discord they're my definitely most highly engaged fans. If you come to a VÉRITÉ show, meet and greet, and ask who's on the Discord, almost everyone will raise their hand. They're the people who show up consistently and every time. And they are probably the most exposed fan base to Web3 because of all of this experimentation I've done over the last few years. They're aware of what they are. They're aware of the experiments I've run. I've given disclaimers. So they're adjacent to the world. Some have bought their first NFTs. Royal was a great vehicle for people purchasing their first NFTs. IYK has been a great vehicle for people claiming digital twins of their physical garments. And so they're adjacent, but I know their sentiments because I talk to them about it all the time. They're after what, 3 years, 3.5 years, they're still not interested. I actually can't say, hey, mint my new drop in my Discord to my fans because they don't give a shit. Some of them hate it. One of the responses I highlighted was, every time you mention NFTs, I want to die, which made me laugh. And so I really felt like I wanted to highlight a frustration that I've been feeling really for the last year and a half
Mm.
as I've kind of watched the changes within the market, that Web3 is wholly B2B and really ignoring the end consumer that we're all trying to capture.
Mm.
And perhaps we should be having and facilitating those conversations and looking to build the experiences that we want our fans and listeners and end consumers of the idealistic products that we're hoping to build to actually have. And
Mm.
so I gathered those responses, I minted them, and then I wrote an essay essentially explaining what I view my role in this world as. Because for me, I've been given hot, unpopular takes for a while, and some of them don't go over well because it feels like at times I'm a Debbie Downer, just
Mm.
trying to ruin everyone's dreams. And I don't mean to be that. But when I see holes in the narrative, when I see holes in the system, to me, what that's indicative of is that artists are going to suffer because they're not going to be able to see the whole picture of how they can and should be maybe building the foundations of their careers, creating constellations of revenue streams, not being overly reliant on new technology, on Web3. And I don't want them to get burned. So me sharing those perspectives is really in an attempt to, A, help artists build their own, help artists really distill how they can build their own, and how can I build really cool experiences for my fans while trying to solve the core problems that I face as an artist, which is I don't know who my fans are. There's a black box of data that exists. And ultimately, we have a marketplace and a music industry that has decided music is free.
Mm-hmm. I feel like it's a really healthy place to ground this conversation because I feel a lot of those same sentiments that you shared within your submission and in the art that you minted. I mean, a lot of those words just struck with me so vividly because I've been spending the last couple of years trying to figure out how do you get fans to actually get exciting about collecting something on chain. The reality is they're not excited about it and they don't care about it and they don't want to do it. And so what ends up happening is you end up marketing to an entirely new audience of people who are extremely passionate about this technology and what it can become, but are often not fans. You know, as you alluded to, there are diamonds in the rough of someone who's been a fan of your music for a long time and they happen to have some ETH, but you either have your real fans over here that love your music and want to support you in every way that they want, or you have people who love crypto and want to support you because you're using their technology. But it feels like the intersection between those two is not getting any closer. And I feel like it's really healthy that we're now having an open conversation about it because, as you said before we got on this podcast, this is a sentiment you've had for a very long time and that you've been feeling very vividly. But it feels like for the first time, collectively, the on-chain music space as a whole, I think, is starting to be a little bit more receptive to the fact that these opinions exist. They have existed for a long time, and we need to do something about it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, for me personally, whenever the conversations start is when they start. And for me, this has become, it's really serendipitous, the fact that I put in this submission and kind of put this out into the world really as a critique of the system.
Hmm.
2 days before, we're now seeing more mainstream artists try and enter in and do a mint and have to pull that down because of the bad reaction of their fan base. And to me, those things happening within 2 days of each other are so serendipitous and just show me that, okay, now we're ready. And
Right.
I think that a lot of things, it's ETH crashing, mints kind of going to from what were, $25,000 per one catalog sale to free, right? It's, are we building sustainable systems? Are
Hmm.
we actually solving problems that face artists, or are we holding on to an idealism that we started a few years ago that people raised a lot of money to
Hmm.
prove out? And are we seeing that collapse? And are we seeing that maybe a pivot is necessary? And for me, like I said before, pivoting for me is very natural. It's fast. If something doesn't work, give me 2 days to mourn it and I'm on to the next. And I
Hmm.
think that the Web3 music, how we're solving these problems, what problems are we actually solving, like we need to do a whole deconstruction and rebuilding of the entire concept.
Yeah. And what I find interesting about the situation you mentioned is that this artist is very forward in their use of technology. You know, they're very prominent on social media. They're really into the idea of using platforms like TikTok to build a fan base. Like, it's not like they're an artist that has fans who are like 60 and are like, anti-technology. Like, these are artists that have like extremely modern fan bases. And on top of that, it's not like this artist was making $1 million from the drop, where beforehand, I think a lot of the reason why people wrote off the, oh, well, fans are pissed is because the artist made a bunch of money and they fleeced their fans. But this is the
Mm,
opposite situation where the artist didn't make any money. They were trying to submit for a genuinely good cause, which was the Optimism on-chain art competition, and they were just trying to play around with a new platform. And I think what it really revealed to me was that in the absence of trying to be really pro crypto, and the absence of trying to make a lot of money, and the absence of trying to over monetize your fan base, all these sentiments still exist for the sole act of you trying to do something, which to me highlights a much bigger underlying problem, which is not only do people not want to do this action, they hate the idea that you even want to try and do it in the first place. And I think that's so important to highlight because it shows that these worlds are still so far apart. And the general sentiment, I obviously don't think that this artist fan base speaks for the rest of the world, but I think we're seeing enough examples now, especially with your submission, where the wider sentiment is that this space is not one that people are interested in. And when they hear about it, they want to run the other way. And so we need to kind of, as you said, reconstruct the foundation here so that there can even be an open conversation in the first place.
Yeah, and I think that there are two pillars to this. It's funny, when I dropped the crew neck, which we can get into later, I wrote like a piece around that, and I remember I wrote these 3 paragraphs about Web3, and one of the headlines was Web3 has a branding problem.
Mm-hmm.
Where I think that Web3 has had a bad branding problem tied to, and literally tied to scams, literally
Mm-hmm.
tied to a volatile market, literally tied towards the archetype of racist and sexist, like crypto bro, like, it's not necessarily like a safe space for fans either to kind of come in, like the degen archetype. And again, this isn't even me shitting on anyone. It's like, when I think of where I bring my fans, am I bringing them to some place where their money is safe? Am I bringing them to some place where it is like a safe space for them to commune and be with other fans?
Mm.
Um, and that branding problem has permeated so far out into these kind of joke headlines. One of the responses I also got was like, NFTs could be cool, but people shit on them so much it's actually not even fun or interesting.
Mm.
Right. And it's so for me, and a lot of that has to do with us trying to frame narratives around this world that actually aren't maybe of interest to fans.
Mm.
I don't, and I say this to people who are not in Web3, other independent artists. The financial plight of the artist is not of interest to the average fan, um, which is a hard pill to swallow. The valuation of music is not of interest to a working class 23-year-old music fan. They
Mm-hmm.
do not care that you're not sitting and making a living from your art. Right? Sometimes a PR narrative will pop up and it'll become, right, Taylor Swift buying back her masters and all of this, and artists deserve to be compensated. And I think back to, me not being an artist, I wasn't considering those things. People are looking for ease of use. People are looking for meaningful and impactful experiences. And so even the narrative sometimes of the creator economy is off-putting, and not necessarily, we're seeing it's not resonating with fans. And so for me, segmenting these two groups out of, yes, let's continue to build in this very niche kind of community and ecosystem, but also how do we distill what the actual and very tangible use cases of blockchain technology is, and use that to solve very real problems for artists and the end user.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think I feel like I just went on a rant, but yeah, it's a tricky problem.
I think I really resonate with what you said about the core tenets that we anchor to within Web3 are not things that the average fan cares about is really accurate. Being able to say Spotify only pays a third of a penny, but here, 100% goes to the artist. In principle, that sounds great. And I think that's a great narrative as to why someone in crypto is excited to be able to use these headlines. But as a fan, I'm so accustomed to not spending any money on music in the first place that you telling me that I can spend more money to give this artist the same thing that I'm already getting, it just doesn't really land one to one. And I think in my mind, a big reason that this space hasn't really clicked with people is that the status around being a collector or like kind of buying something on chain, getting in a chat group, whatever it might be, I don't think that experience has drastically outweighed the traditional experience of what you just alluded to, which is all your biggest fans are in Discord. You talk to them all the time. They're getting basically all the benefits that you would get from buying something for $10,000 on chain for just showing up and being active. And so I feel like that's kind of the biggest disconnect that I see is the value prop of what's being offered for consistently spending money on an artist on chain does not match or outweigh the benefits that you can get as a fan by just being extremely active in the places that that artist says that you want them to be active in.
Yeah. No, that is literally one of the holes that I saw around the buy now drop even. It's how do you properly incentivize and reward someone who's paying this top dollar for something without alienating all of the people who stream your music every day, who buy your merch, who show up to shows, who just participate, right? Part of the reason, right, if we're even talking about non monetized reasons why I'm an artist, who listen to the music and love it,
Hmm.
right? I would fucking serve these people if they never paid me a dollar and they just wanted to listen to the music and make jokes about knives, which is kind of
Hmm.
what we do on Discord, you know? And am I happy with the monetization aspect? Do I believe that music has a place to have a higher value from patrons who have the ability to pay it and have status as a patron? Which, like, you're a patron of my project. Everyone who's bought an NFT from me is a patron of this project, has allowed me to continue to build, create, and experiment independently, and has fundamentally changed my life. But I can't, it's really difficult and almost impossible to then like start segmenting and ranking people based on how much money they spend on me.
Hmm.
And I'm not sure that that's necessarily solving the actual problem, right? That's, if we can kind of go back and forth, but it's like really distilling what are the actual problems that we're facing is key. Because for me, it goes back to what I said. I don't know who my fans are. Blockchain can provide a transparent ledger of fan actions. Is selling NFTs serving that purpose? Not really. Right? It's not really solving that problem. Okay, there's a monetization problem. Is selling NFTs solving that problem? Maybe. Is it solving that problem at scale based on how much NFTs are currently worth right now versus how much money I can make selling a tote bag? No.
Hmm.
I make more money selling merch right now than I do selling NFTs for 0.003 ETH.
Yeah.
So it's not solving that problem. Is it providing a cool and novel experience for fans using technology? No, we've seen they don't like it. The technology is clunky. There's risk. I'm not going to tell a fan to buy ETH, right? Someone just hacked the SEC Twitter to try and manipulate the market, right? It's like, it's chaotic here, which
Mm-hmm.
is part of why I love it. I love the chaos. I love the puzzle. Like, I'm here, right? If I hated this shit, I'd be gone,
Mm-hmm.
right? But I find tremendous value in having these conversations and in making these experiments, and trying to genuinely figure out what are the solutions to these things. And I think so often we get uh, far away from the actual problems that artists are facing and the actual ways that blockchain can help solve those problems, because it's way sexier to be like, I don't know, I sold 1,000 NFTs, look at me.
Yeah. And I think to your point about in the current market being able to make more money from a merch drop than an NFT drop, I really want to zoom in there because I think it speaks to how much more willing fans are to buy things that are existing behaviors than to learn net new behaviors. That's not to say
Mm-hmm.
that, you know, your fans are like overly, we really want tote bags, you know, give us tote bags, we need tote bags. It's just a format that I think lands in a much more natural way than the expectation around what would land if they were to buy an NFT. And I think what this means to me is that an artist has so much pressure on themselves to be able to educate their fan base on why they should go and download a wallet and buy this net new thing and have all these amazing possible future benefits and whatnot, versus selling them a tote bag, which is something that artists have been doing for years and years at this point. It's very common. You can buy it with a credit card. It's going to show up on your doorstep. There's no questions about it. You're not asking what the utility of your tote bag is, if this tote bag is going to be worth $1,000 at some point in the future. And I guess for me, the biggest challenge that I see is like, why are these two things so far away? If we boil it down to its simplest form, a tote bag is a physical collectible and an NFT is a digital collectible. Why is there such a dissonance between why a real fan is willing to buy a tote bag and a real fan is not willing to buy an NFT? And how do you think that we get to somewhere in the middle?
It's the same difference between why someone buys a piece of art to put on their wall and someone won't pay for an MP3.
Mm-hmm.
One is tangible, one you can hold in your hand, one has real life attributes and an experience tied with them, whether it's I can physically look at it, versus one is kind of more. It's intangible, it's ephemeral, like you can
Mm,
hear music, it can be in the space with you, but it's you. I think that there's a lack of physicality that psychologically separates someone
right.
from that experience. And I think that, yes, while we're all pretty fucking terminally online, that there is this human desire to exist in the real world and to spend money, right? Spend our finite resources on tangible objects, on tangible experiences that we interface with, and then perhaps tie those physical objects and experiences back into the digital realm so that our time spent online reflects those physical experiences and vice versa.
Mm. Do you want to talk a little bit more about the crew neck you alluded to earlier? Because I feel like this is a really good example of a product that has a very tangible physical aspect to it, but then also has a very compelling digital twist to it.
Yeah, hold on one second. I'm like, maybe I have, yeah, I have it right here. I
Look at
have the
that.
crew neck. Well, I don't have the crew neck, but I have the Verite black card, which is basically the crew neck in card form, which is kind of cool.
Nice.
So Verite, all kill and no regret. It's the only black card that won't put you in debt. Um, but essentially utilizing the same technology as the crew neck. I've been working with IYK since Chris and I walked around McCarran Park in 2020, and he showed me the first deck. And it was around the time that I was, early in selling NFTs and making these experiments and seeing the holes, seeing how in this one realm, high valuation, crypto native patrons who are amazing and kind of here to experiment. Yes, it works here, but none of this translates to my fans. None of this translates into my world. And I can't bring people, I can't merge the worlds,
Mm.
because it's not good for either world, really.
Yeah.
And so I had a desire, like you said, we're expanding upon existing behaviors of people. Uh, People buy clothing, people buy merchandise. And it started off as a concept called guest book, where one of the promoters that I was working with went under in COVID in Washington, D.C., and I was going on tour. And we weren't selling as many tickets because all of the data, the historical data of people who had attended my shows in DC, we didn't have access to it because the promoter went under. And as an artist, I actually don't know who comes to my shows. There's no transparency between um, the Live Nations, Ticketmasters, even independent promoters. They don't let that trickle down. So it became this idea of how can we use proof of proximity to allow people to prove they were at the show. Maybe they get something, a reward, a token of their attendance. And I get transparent data about who's attending the shows. So we kind of started there with IYK, and then eventually put that into merchandise. And we tagged a crew neck, and I did a really premium crew neck. I think we sold like 260, which is a
Mm-hmm.
good amount of crew necks. And it was a portal into the next era of Verite. So by tapping your crew neck, you were able to experience the next era, all of the new music first. But so there was and still is blockchain technology embedded in this, embedded in the crew neck, even embedded in the guest book experience. But a lot of what I think is really brilliant about IYK is that they're utilizing their products as a door to experience, to as a door to claim your object as a digital twin, as a door to that world, but it's not necessary in order to have the initially promised experience. So
Mm-hmm.
the value proposition is always attainable, is always upfront, and you leave people satisfied initially just by taking the action. For guestbook,
Mm.
it was you can leave me a message. So if you don't want to claim your NFT, how cool is it that you get to go to someone's show and directly leave the artist a message from that show?
Mm.
Right? With the crew neck, it's I get to hear all the Verite music first. I get all these behind the scenes videos from my crew neck. That's cool. Even with this black card, it's the same. I've just randomly am dropping videos. I'm doing it chaotically just as an experiment to see what happens. And and I know IYK separately has these grand visions of, well, what happens when you have 5,000 of these in the world and you have this data set that ties back and allows me to just have a better understanding of um, who my fans are and what they're doing and what they like and what they want to interact with, not reliant on, algorithm, not reliant on these kind of gate kept data points.
Mm. So is the solution that every artist starts selling crew necks? Some IYK based crew necks?
Maybe. Personally, I think it's really cool.
Yeah.
And I think that when I look at my fan base who doesn't care about crypto, who doesn't care about NFTs, who is skeptical at best, I can say that in every experience, other than initially for the first round of guestbook, the tap didn't work all the time because it was on a laminated sheet of paper, the chip, because that's how early everything was. Um, I have gotten no negative sentiments and experiences from the value I promised versus the end experience of the user. And to
Yeah.
me, that is most indicative of a satisfied value proposition.
100%.
Is people buy their thing, they have an experience, and they're happy. And that is the end goal. And I have to say, I have to relook at the data, but something like 30 to 40% of people who received their crew neck claimed it
Mm-hmm.
as an NFT with zero education, with zero prompting, with zero guidance. Right? I do not educate my fans on crypto. I do not walk them through anything. It is not my place. If they want to claim their thing, they need to go do their own research, make their own wallet, and then have the empowerment and autonomy to make their own decisions about what they
Mm.
want to do in this world and arena. But it's part of the brilliance of IYK. It is taking these things, giving a really tangible and clear experience, and then envisioning a world where we can utilize the data and experiences in order to build better reward systems so that artists can better understand their audiences and vice versa.
Hmm. Something I find really unique about your situation is that you have such a loyal fan base already baked into all of these experiments. So like when you run an IYK crew neck, it's amazing that you have 260 people that are willing to buy that. And I feel like some of the issues that currently exist around Web3 today is that for all intents and purposes, most of these artists who are really active in the space do not have real fan bases. They have a very small set of people that have grown to collect their music. But if you had to ask them to go and sell 100 t-shirts to real fans, they don't have real fans. And so what I've noticed is that artists who want to start growing a real fan base, they almost use the Web3 space as a launch pad to give them some capital, to give them some autonomy, some independence, all the things that we started about. And then they go into the TikToks of the world, the Instagrams of the world. They start building a fan base. And now all of a sudden, their energy is pointed towards my real fans and the pursuit of gaining real fans and not towards my collectors. And so now you have these two different camps of people who have an expectation. We were there early. We supported you before anyone else did. We spent a lot of money on you. We were there to uplift you. But the artist starts to turn their head and they go, yeah, but I want people to listen to my music. Like, it's great that you guys gave me $100,000, but like, what is $100,000 if there's no one to listen to my music? I'm going to go make TikToks. I'm going to go make reels. I start getting a little bit of buzz on social media. this is where I'm spending my attention, is on the people who genuinely want to listen to my music and come buy tickets to my show and come buy crew necks. I don't really care about these collectors anymore. And so now you almost have like an audience that feels a little bit abandoned as a collector because you were there supporting this person for so long, and the artist shifts their intention. And I think to our entire conversation here, these two things are so far removed that the collector is not a part of the conversation of real fans on Spotify, Instagram, and TikTok, where they are treated as completely different segments. And I think it just creates a lot of tension between both because they're so polarized in a lot of different ways.
Yes, for 3000%. I'm just thinking of myself, and I think that part of the way that I've navigated this, and you have to understand, I'm a unicorn as an artist. Like I have a very segmented brain. So I
Mm,
have like the artistic side, the creative side, writing albums, producing albums, building worlds, touring. And then the other half of my brain is fucking all business. It is all strategy. It is all kind of precision in a lot of ways. And so I think part of the reason that I can bridge these worlds is because I'm able to exist in both of them.
mm,
And I understand both of them, and I understand the motivations and um, why people want to do both. And I think for me, my collectors are patrons, and how I can best serve them in my mind is to continue working towards building systems and structures that build a better music industry that allow artists and creatives to build more sustainable careers. So that's
mm,
how I view my service to my collectors. There's a lot of, I could have taken the money and dipped
mm-hmm.
and just gone back to my people. Um, but that doesn't feel correct, and it doesn't feel in line with my motivations of like why I got into all of this. But I do that on the other side too, in the more traditional, web to having conversations with artists about the intersection of their creativity, building sustainable businesses, etc. Because my main goal here is to really just allow people to have more freedom and autonomy and to be able to exhale. And maybe it's because just come from this scarcity blue collar mindset of like I will be working like a dog till the day I die,
Mm,
right? This thing, and I want people to have maybe the freedom that I'll never allow myself to have, if that makes sense.
yeah.
um but I think that for that disparity, it's people really needing to come to understand what their true intention is, what their true goal is, what their true north is. And I think over the last few years especially, I've really defined what that is for me.
Yeah.
And so it allows me to pivot seamlessly back and forth, because for my fans, the idea that I'm experimenting with new tools to help artists build better careers is in line with what I've been doing the last 10 years, just with different tools and in different arenas.
Right.
Right. And so there's a fun, it's not a brand shift for me to be all fucking tech and crypto. It's me being like, hey, I'm finding this interesting and I want to distill, if there's any value here, please like respect that I'm going to go do that. And they're like, yeah, but we don't want to buy your NFTs.
Yeah. And I feel like you have an extremely mature perspective here, and I think that's something that I've just been recognizing lately as I work with emerging artists, artists who are new to their career. They're still figuring out who they are, what their voice is. I'd say a lot of the value prop of Web3 is to be there early and to be there first, right? So naturally what that means is you want to be supporting artists who are really earlier in their career, but that means that they don't have the same level of maturity that someone like you does to be able to say, I'm going to think of these worlds separately. I'm going to be very clear about my intention of what's going on here. I would say for all intents and purposes, when a new artist is putting a song on Sound, they send a MP3 and a cover art, and they take a leap of faith and they say, okay, I'm going to put this thing out here. I don't know what's good with this world. I don't know who I'm speaking to. I know that I got a song and I know that I can probably, get a couple of people to collect it. But like, am I trying to be a crypto person? No, I'm just like new in my career, open to trying new things, down to kind of take a spin at it and see what happens. And then you see situations like this week where I'm going to assume that was kind of the mentality of the artist that got a lot of backlash was, we're down to try it. You know what I mean? We don't really care about this space, but we're down to try it. That's met with like, hell no, like don't try that thing, run the other way. It's not going to work, which is a really visceral response. What I see more commonly these days is artist wants to take a spin at it. They want to try it. They go out of their way to put their song on this new platform. And then it's crickets. You get like, 3 random 0x F59 addresses that are buying this song. And then as like the artist, you're like, all right, cool. Like I made like, $20, $50, but is this something I'm going to like invest my time and energy into to building a diehard collector base that's like the core of my business? No way. And so I feel like there's just this huge issue of like, how do you even interface with the space right now as someone who's not trying to be crypto, but that wants to be forward with technology, but that's actually worth your time? Because all things considered, an artist getting 3-5 mints from random people that they're never going to actually talk to, it doesn't really move the needle. And I think before it really used to move the needle financially for someone, which is why they put so much time and energy into it. They could make the equivalent of 3 to 5 million streams in an hour, and it was this kumbaya moment that doesn't exist anymore. And so I think it leaves this question of like, well, why am I even doing it in the first place? Which means that most artists, when push comes to shove, don't do it because it's just not worth all the potential backlash that could come in these really like specific visceral moments that I think exist in a lot more pockets than we give credit to as people that are, active and excited about this space in the first place. Like the risk is not
Yeah,
worth the reward. That's another way of saying it, I think.
the risk isn't worth the reward, but also it's really no different that if I just upload a song and a cover art to Spotify that no one will listen to it. Right? It's not so
That's what it
dissimilar.
should be, right? Like that's what it should be. But I think the interesting thing is that that's not what it is. Like it doesn't feel like you're uploading a song to Spotify and like if no one listens, like I'm sad. Like it feels like you're like, you have to prep yourself, you have to get media trained, you have to, educate your fans on the fact that you're entering this new world. Like, dude, you don't have to go to your Discord and be like, hey guys, I'm uploading a song to Spotify. Make sure to go buy that subscription. And by the way, it's going to renew. Like you can listen to it. Like, it just feels way easier over here. And it feels way harder over here to even give it a shot in the first place.
I think it's because people haven't framed their narratives. Like
Mm,
that's how it really feels. And I think that stepping into a world that is foreign to people who have been supporting you, that feels foreign, feels scary, has a lot of bad press,
mm,
and also that you're disinterested in.
mm.
Right. And I think that's where it comes down to. And I've been really active on Twitter these last few days. Maybe it's just because I'm excited that people are finally here. I'm like, guys, I'm so glad you see what I see. Like, let's talk.
Yeah.
Um, but this is not an education problem. I think that
Yeah.
people want it to be that it's an education problem, and if people only knew what we were building here, they would be here. I don't think it's that. I think it is a core value proposition problem that is framing the artist as the end user when ultimately none of this exists, no revenue flows through. Artists are not solving the value of their music problem, they're not solving their data problem, unless they're actually able to reach people. And people are kind of like, we don't want to be here.
Mm.
And I'm like, you have to listen to that. You have to listen to it and you have to respect it. If I tell you I don't fucking like, I don't know, soda, stop trying to give me soda. Like, stop trying to feed me something I'm telling you I don't want. And I think that maybe that's like the arrogance of all fucking tech companies
Yeah.
is like, oh, the average person is dumb. They don't know what they want. And I just disagree. I interface with these people all the time. They're fucking funny. They're smart. They're in tune. They'll tell you what they want. And if you can listen, you can actually experiment in this world in a way that has the potential to add value to your relationship with these people over here. But I
Mm.
think it takes a level of humility and a level of patience. Again, I could have made so much more money. right? I could have played this shit way harder. But at the end of the day, I think it would have put me in a position where um there would be cracks in my story, cracks in my foundation, cracks in my narrative. And I can say for certain, I don't regret anything I've said. I don't regret
Mm-hmm.
anything I've done. I have not had the negative backlash, and it's because every step that I've taken has been so like methodical and thought through, thinking through unintended consequences, etc. It's just like one step after another, and it makes for slower growth sometimes again, which is way less, I don't know, pizzazz.
Hmm.
But I think for me, I actually want to solve problems. I actually just want to make this like the music industry and the ability to for creators to create what they want to create easier and better.
Hmm. And how do you see this evolving? Like, take into consideration everything that we talked about in this combo. It seems like people are starting to wake up a little bit to some of the sentiments that exist out there. What do you think happens over the next like 6 to 12 months here? Do you think we just exist in an echo chamber for another year and then ETH starts going back up when we run the whole thing back? Or do you think that there's actually a real wake up call that we need to kind of rewrite the rules here and that something different actually happens?
I think, I mean, listen, it's possible that there's another run of speculation on NFTs, music NFTs. Like, I'm not going to say there won't be. Um, Whatever that is not going to be sustainable at scale for the long term, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that ETH popping off means people have more money to just throw at shit. So that could be the case. I really do think that, um, like, if I were the CEO of a Web3, especially a music Web3 startup, I would be hiring people with an understanding of how these things work to be on the team,
Hmm.
right, providing insights, uh, b to do research about what the end consumer actually wants instead of just assuming that the end consumer is stupid and doesn't know what they want.
Hmm.
um, and c, I don't know, I would do a full audit of
Yeah.
everything. And I
Yeah.
think that, what's really interesting, I did a project with Highlight, like
Mm-hmm.
right as, I mean, everything was tanking, like not Highlight, but like the market.
Yeah.
And and it was right before they pivoted to generative art,
Yep.
right? They were making fan tools for NFTs and then they pivoted. And I really so respect that pivot because
Hmm.
I imagine it was a hard decision to say, hey, we're working on this thing, but we're seeing where the walls are, we're seeing where the points of friction are, and we don't think we're gonna be able to scale it in this way, so we're going to pivot here because we actually see runway, we see way more potential. And I've always really respected Nat for that,
Hmm.
um, because that's a hard decision. I look at that with IYK, this idea of like looking at the market where it is and providing really like cool and useful tools, and with IYK platform, the ability for people to use those tools in a self-service way, to automate that process. Like, I think it's really narrowing in on, all right, what problem are we actually solving, and what steps are we going to take to solve it. And I think, I mean, I hope to see more artists just empowered to really build out their visions, through whatever means, and building a constellation of revenue streams around themselves,
Yeah.
so that at any given moment in a market run, that they're able to make the living they need to make, put their oxygen mask on so that they can continue making the art that they're going to make and serving the people that they're meant to serve.
100%. And I really appreciate you coming and sharing these sentiments because it's one that we've talked about quite a bit on this podcast, just the realization that we got a long way to go. You know, it's not just because East down that these sentiments exist. It's not just because people don't. I just really resonate with what you said about the education thing. Like, it's not an education problem that people aren't using this. They just don't want to use it. Like, I think your analogy about I don't want soda, don't give me soda is so accurate. So I just want to say thank you for coming on and sharing this, because I think it's something a lot more people need to take seriously. And I feel like you always do a really great job of just clearly articulating what it is that exists today, and then posing some really, thought-provoking conversations about how we can make changes in the future moving forward.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me on. And I just want to say that all of my critique, it really isn't meant to kill dreams, which I
Yeah.
know I think I'm like really blunt and direct New Yorker. Like I can't help it. So sometimes I'm just like to the point and not flowery or um, putting the pizzazz in it. But it really is because I care. Again, if I wasn't here to genuinely try and build a better future for all of this, I would have taken the money and left
Yeah.
and been like, peace, I'm going to go on tour.
Yeah.
But I really feel like the directness of my critiques is meant to create conversations that are going to create the impact and change necessary to solve real problems.
And I think in a full circle way, that's the role of everyone that's currently still here, is to be the spokesperson, to recognize that there are these gaps that exist, to say that we are excited about figuring it out, but not being shy to admit where there are shortcomings, and being vulnerable about that and saying to your fans, look, I know that you guys hate NFTs. Like, I'm not unaware of that. I'm not going to try and convince you to do it, but finding a way to at least be open in that conversation. Because to your point, if you start from like, what do you guys want, versus here's more soda, drink it, I feel like that's going to lead to a lot healthier conversation. And I'm hopeful that people that are active in this space and starting to build fan bases more broadly can look at this space as an opportunity to be a leader in figuring out what the right way to use this as a tool becomes. Because when we do figure that out, it's going to be powerful, but it's really important to recognize we are years away from that still. And so just be prepared to go through a lot of shit to get there in the first place.
Oh yeah, it's a roller coaster. I love it. I love trying to solve the problem. I love debating.
Hmm.
So I'm kind of like meant for all this in a weird way.
And for those who want to keep up with your work outside of this podcast, or maybe get some inside looks as to what's happening next, what's the best way for them to keep up with your journey?
At Verite on all socials, I think is the best way. You can like join my newsletter. You can join the Discord, but only if you want to talk about like fan things.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to say my Discord is funny as fuck.
100%. And I just want to say too, thank you for the submission that you made for this contest. As you did allude to earlier, it was a risky one, but it was something that felt very profound to me. And as someone that's felt a lot of these emotions, I think you really crystallized it in a way that was very easy to digest. And I think it was super important for you to just lay out, this is not you on a soapbox, like having an opinion that something is a certain way. It was like, yo, here are the responses. Like, it's not like I'm tailoring this in a certain way. It's not like I'm trying to spin this into a certain image or light. It's like, this is the reality of the situation. And I really do believe that people who are willing to express that to the rest of the space is going to be a lot more progressive than just constantly kumbaya, this is the future of music, we're going to figure it all out. So thank you for your vulnerability in that. And I really appreciate the way that you presented it.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me.
Well, I'm excited. Thank you for joining, and we'll see you guys again next week. Mic drop.
Thank you.
Now